Okay guys, nice to meet you again. In this video, I would like to describe about how to write a thesis proposal for English language education. And in this video, I will just telling you about how to arrange a qualitative thesis for Strata 1, especially for English language education for Universitas Batanghari, Jambi. Okay, you may have some variations of kind of how to write thesis, but this is specialized for English education students of Batanghari University only. And please read and listen very carefully every description I tell you in this video to get better knowledge for you. Okay, in chapter 1 you have introduction about the proposal of qualitative research. For the first, you have to write the background of the problem that you want to search in your research letter. And the second, you have the identification of the problems, where you need to identify all the problems that relate to your research. And then the third, you have limitation of the problems. Okay, based on the identification of the problem you identified, then you limited the problems above. And the next, number 4, you have formulation of the problem. In many other research and many other theses, this is formulation of the problem the same like research questions for your thesis, where you have to focus your research on this formulation of the problem, where the formulation of the problem is in the form of questions, where later you need to answer the questions. And then number 5, you have the objective of the research. You write what is the main objective of your research here clearly. And then number 6, you have the significance of the research. So you need to write what is actually the most important thing that you want to offer to the educational world by conducting your research here. You write the significance of the research. And the last, number 7, definition of the key terms. So you write the definition of the key terms here. First, you need to write all words related to the title you have, and you just give a brief definitions to make the reader clear what is actually your thesis about, or your thesis will be about. Okay, let's move to the chapter 2, where you need to write theoretical framework, or you may write review of the related literature, where you need to write the theoretical study. You write all related theories related to your thesis titles. So you don't need to write some theories that there is no correlations to your research. And then number 2, you have review of the related study, where you got to find the study that has most likely the same with your research will be. And then number 3, you have the previous study, and in previous study you get to write all the studies that relate almost the same, or maybe probably the same with your research, and you got to write the finding of the previous studies and the name of the researcher and the results of the studies, and also the strength of the previous study you got, and also the weaknesses of the previous study you got. And at least you got to write 1 researcher of the previous studies from our country, and 2 reviews previous study from another country. And the number 4, is the reason why you have to write almost the same with the previous study that you have already read in the previous study above. And you got to be precisely explain why and what is the most important thing that you want to offer to the educational field in our countries. And then we move to number 4. There is a framework of thinking, and relate to your titles of your thesis. What is the most important thinking or thought that you need to propose, you need to search in your thesis? This name a framework of thinking. And the next, in qualitative research, in chapter 2, number 5, we have hypothesis, if any. So it's different with the quantitative research. In qualitative research, if you have hypothesis, it is nice, you write in your thesis. But if do not have hypothesis, it is no matter, because this is kind of choice, kind of methodology you want to offer. If there is hypothesis, you write, and if do not have hypothesis, that's no problem, you don't need to write. Okay, we continue to chapter 3, research methodology. Okay, in research methodology, you have to write, number 1, time and place of research. So it is very important things that you have to write, when and where you will conduct the research precisely. And then number 2, research design and approach. You need to be very specific about the design of your research and the approach that you do for your research in way of finding the data and also finding the results later. And number 3, you have to write data and data resources. What kind of data you want to find in the field, you need to explain here in detail, and also the data resources. So from what kind of results you want to collect the data. This number 4, you have technique of sampling. You need to write precisely and clearly about the technique of sampling. What kind of sampling you want to write, you need to explain in detail after you got the sample of your research. And then number 5, you have the technique of collecting data. So how the data will be gathered from the sites. And then the technique you need to also write very clearly and very precisely here to make easy everyone read the technique of the data. And then number 6, technique of data validation. In qualitative research, you have the validation of the data. So you write here how is the technique of data validation. And number 7, you have to write technique of analyzing data. And then you have to write also how to analyze the data using what techniques precisely. Of course, you got to read many resources for building up your thesis. And then number 8, you have to write research procedure. So you need to write the research procedures from the very beginning of your research till you got the results of your research. You need to clearly write or explain the procedure of the research in chapter 3. Okay, I hope that you can understand the chapter number 3. Okay, let's move to chapter 4. But this is the most important thing in your thesis. But for conducting your research proposal is finished till chapter 3. But after getting your proposal examinations, you need to move to the sites to gather the data from the sites, and also to try to analyze and to process all the data you gather from the field. And all real research will be written very detailed in the chapter 4, where chapter 4 you need to explain in detail about the findings and the discussions. And in chapter 4 you have 4 kind of things that you have to write. The first is data description. In data description, you need to describe every detailed data, every single data you got from the site, and you need to explain that in very keen information. And number 2, you have to write testing of analysis requirements. You need to test about the requirements of analysis that you use in your thesis. And number 3, you have testing of hypothesis. As qualitative research may have a hypothesis. If you have hypothesis, you have to write also how to test the hypothesis you had in the previous, if you write. But if you don't have hypothesis, of course, number 3, testing of hypothesis, you don't need to write. Then we move to number 4, results, discussion of data analysis. Here you need to discuss about the results in details, and you need to also oppose with the data analysis you have already explained in above. So how to discuss about the result of your thesis, you need to write here in details. So I would like to say that chapter 4 is the heart of a thesis, is also the heart of this dissertation of Strata 3 students. So in chapter 4, you need to have more explanation, because this is the heart and the head of a thesis. The findings will be described here in detail, and also discussion also you will have to write here in detail about the results and the data. You need to club, you need to match between the result and the data. Okay, the last but not least, chapter 5. In chapter 5 you have to write conclusion, implication and suggestion. Okay, of course, first conclusion, you need to conclude what the results of your thesis have already explained in chapter 4 in very explicit and implicit meanings that in conclusion you need to write. And the implications you need also to write. To write what if the result of your thesis cannot be implemented in the field of education, and if it is can be implemented in the field of education, so what will be the results of your thesis to influence the educational world in our city at least. This is the implication, the positive impact or maybe a negative impact of the results of your thesis. You have to write here in the implication. And okay, in number 3, suggestion. And what is your findings says in your thesis, and what is your suggestions to many stakeholders that you want to hope to implement your results, and maybe from the students, suggestion for the teachers, and suggestion for the institutions, and also suggestion for another researchers. You need to write here in the suggestions. And of course, the last, key references, you need to write every researches you have already written in your body text, and references must match to the results you have in the real life. And then the style of references, you need to follow upper styles. We have already, or maybe you can search in the internet the upper styles in the 7th edition. And then you have appendices. In appendices, you need to attach all the documentation you got from the field in order to enrich your research. And appendices must be put at the end of your thesis to complete your thesis with the documentations in the appendices. Okay, that's all for this qualitative research, and you have to follow another video about quantitative research. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe my channel. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bye bye.